Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're taking a look at a pretty amazing collection of insights that you, our listeners, helped us put together.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about excerpts from Peter Drucker's book, The 5 Most Important Questions You Will Ever Ask About Your Organization.
It's a good one.
It is a good one, and along with those excerpts, you send us a bunch of really interesting perspectives from other big thinkers in the leadership space. People like Jim Collins, Philip Kotler, Jim Kouzes, Judith Rodin,
Oh, wow.
and Kasturi Rangan. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today, but our mission here is to really pull out the most actionable knowledge that we can from these experts on how organizations should be thinking about assessing themselves and thinking strategically about the future.
Yeah.
And we want to do it in a way that is clear and engaging for you.
That's right. So we've got the best minds in the business here to help us unpack these ideas.
That's right.
And Peter Drucker especially is really considered to be the father of modern management. And he really focuses on the practical side of things. So the beauty of these questions in his book is that they're not just these, kind of academic exercises.
Right.
They're designed as tools that you can use. And they can be used by any organization, really. Whether you're a business and you're looking for growth, or you're a nonprofit dedicated to a cause, or you're a government agency trying to serve the public.
It's really for anyone, right?
It is. And you'll find, actually, that the relevance of these questions can even extend to your personal and professional numbers.
So let's dive in. The first question, what is our mission? This feels like
the starting point.
Yeah, like the very beginning where it all began.
That's the foundation, yeah.
Yeah, so what is our mission? Like, why does an organization exist? What's its reason for being?
Yeah, and Drucker really argues that every institution in the social sector, and by that he means any organization that's not solely driven by profit.
Right.
So that encompasses nonprofits, government agencies, schools, you name it, exists to make a distinctive difference in the world. So it's really about being able to identify what that unique contribution is and making sure that it carries meaning, deep meaning for everyone involved.
He actually uses a really great story to illustrate this point about a hospital emergency room.
I love this story.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
At first, they had defined their mission as just healthcare.
Right, which seems obvious on the surface.
Seems pretty straightforward, but Drucker kind of challenged them.
To dig deeper.
Yeah, like what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
What is the real, core purpose here?
Exactly, and it was really interesting to see the impact that had when they actually refined their mission statement to give assurance to the afflicted.
Right.
Suddenly, they were completely focused on immediate triage. It didn't matter what your specific ailment was when you walked through the door.
It's just that you were suffering.
You needed immediate attention and reassurance.
Wow.
So the takeaway here is that it's not just about having a mission statement.
Right.
It's about questioning it and refining it constantly until it reflects the core impact that you want to make.
Yeah, even if, in your industry or your sector, seems pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Like healthcare, it's like...
Yeah, but it's amazing.
There's more to it.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about this mission statement. Drucker really emphasizes that it needs to be concise, focused, and inspirational. Like, it should fit on a T-shirt, he says.
Yeah.
And it really needs to articulate why you do what you do, not just how you do it.
The why, not the how.
The why, not the how.
That's at the heart of it.
Yeah. And, kind of connecting this back to the bigger picture, he also talks about aligning opportunity, competence, and commitment.
Right.
So you have to look at what's going on outside in the world. What are the needs?
Absolutely. And what's your organization good at? What are you competent at?
Yeah, what are you really good at?
Yeah.
And then is there a real drive and passion?
That commitment.
Yeah, from the people within the organization to fulfill that purpose.
Yeah. You need all three.
You need all three of those things. Okay.
For sure.
And then he raises this really critical warning, I think, especially for nonprofits, but it could be for anyone. And this is about never letting the pursuit of funding, like getting money, resources.
Right.
Never let that overshadow or compromise the core mission of the organization.
Yeah, never subordinate the mission to get money.
Yeah.
He's very clear about that.
And he uses a really compelling example of a museum that was offered a huge donation
of
art, but the donation came with all of these conditions that basically went against the core value.
Totally against what they stood for.
Of the museum. And so they were faced with this really difficult decision. Do we take this, amazingly valuable art, or do we stay true to our values?
It's a tough one.
And they ultimately decided that their values were more important.
Powerful, right?
Yeah. So
it really shows the importance of having that integrity.
Yeah. The mission really is like a compass.
Your North Star guiding your decisions.
Yeah.
It's not something that should be flexible for, expediency.
So, we're talking about the foundation of the mission and how important that is. And Jim Collins also offers a really interesting perspective on how that core mission interacts with, the need for organizations to grow and adapt and change over time.
Right, because it does seem like there's a paradox there.
Right. How do you stay true to your core, but also evolve?
Exactly.
At the same time, so what's really fascinating is that Collins observed that organizations that are the most successful and resilient over time, they all have this deep understanding of what he calls their core ideology.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like their fundamental set of values and their purpose, and that should never change.
Right.
To remain constant.
And that's the fixed anchor that allows them to navigate the changing world.
Right.
Because they know what must never be compromised.
Right. And they can change everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
But that core stays.
And their strategies and practices can change and evolve over time.
Yeah.
But the core ideology remains the same.
And he uses, I thought, really great analogies to illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about like the principles at the heart of Judaism.
Timeless principles.
Yeah, or the truths that are in the U.S. Declaration of Independence.
Bedrock ideals.
Yeah, or even like the ideals of the scientific community.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things, like those are the bedrock that provides the foundation.
That's right.
And Collins really emphasizes that this core mission is not only a guide for what you should do, but also what you should not do.
Oh, that's so important.
And he uses a great example from Frances Hesselbein, who was a leader at the Girl Scouts.
Oh, she's fantastic.
An amazing leader.
Yeah, their motto was to help a girl reach her highest potential. And that was their filter.
Yes, it was like their filter, and that's how they made decisions.
Yeah, like they would even say no to opportunities.
Yeah, that maybe looked good.
Yeah, that seemed really attractive.
But they didn't fit.
They didn't fit with that core purpose.
It's so important, especially today.
Oh, absolutely.
In a world that feels so unpredictable and, chaotic.
So disruptive.
That having this really clear mission can provide that sense of stability.
Yeah, that guiding light.
And belonging for people and a real sense of purpose and values.
Yeah, keeps you on track.
So our next question that Drucker raises is, who is our customer?
Now, this is an interesting one because he points out that the term customer actually wasn't always so readily adopted in the social sector.
Yeah, he actually says that a lot of places didn't like to use the term customer.
That's true.
They would say things like clients or
recipients,
patients,
constituents.
Yeah, all kinds of different terms.
But Drucker cuts through all of that with a very direct and essential question.
Mm-hmm.
Who must be satisfied for the organization to achieve its intended results?
Right. And he makes this really important distinction between what he calls primary customers and supporting customers.
Yeah.
So the primary customers are the people whose lives are directly changed by the organization's work.
Right. The ultimate beneficiaries of what you do.
And then supporting customers might include volunteers, donors, funding agencies, community partners.
Anyone who helps make it possible to serve those primary customers.
And what he says is that for an organization to be really effective, it needs to understand and strive to satisfy both of these groups.
Both are essential.
Okay.
And what's really insightful is that he cautions against trying to serve too many primary customers.
Okay.
He says that it can dilute your impact if your focus is too broad.
Right. You can't be everything to everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he uses a really interesting example of a nonprofit that helps individuals who face multiple barriers to employment. And they operate 25 different programs.
That's a lot.
That address various aspects of their clients' needs.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is they maintain a laser focus on that single primary customer.
Right.
That individual facing barriers to employment.
So even though they have 25 programs, they're all centered around that one primary customer.
Exactly.
And he also makes a point that your primary customer isn't always someone you can directly interact with or even identify. Think about organizations that are focused on, the well-being of infants,
Right.
or preserving the environment for future generations.
Yeah.
It's not like you can go and have a conversation with.
Yeah, but you can still define that primary customer.
Yeah.
And use that to set your priorities.
And we see the Girl Scouts example come up again here, right?
Oh, yeah, they're a great case study.
Where they're really good at serving their primary customer.
The girl herself.
The girl.
But they're also very aware of the needs and expectations of their supporting customers. The parents, the troop leaders.
The donors.
The donors, yeah.
And they're really proactive in reaching diverse groups.
Absolutely.
And engaging with all of these different people.
And it just highlights the fact that customers aren't static.
Right.
Their needs, their demographics, their expectations.
Their traits.
They are constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And organizations need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And be prepared to adapt. They might even need to, add or stop serving certain customer groups as their relevance to the mission changes.
Yeah.
Drucker even tells this funny story about a program that was designed for newly married couples.
Oh, yeah.
But it ended up becoming really popular with unmarried couples who were living together.
Yeah, they didn't realize.
It just goes to show you, you need to really know your customer.
Through observation and feedback.
Yeah, don't make assumptions.
And speaking of really knowing your customer, Philip Kotler, who's a big name in marketing.
A giant.
Yeah, he adds his perspective here. And he says that the most successful organizations don't just want to acquire customers. They want to cultivate fans.
Yeah, passionate fans.
Yeah, passionate fans.
That's a whole different level.
And he thinks that it's really important to understand and exceed the expectations of your target customers.
Yes. The target customers are key here.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Right, because then you end up being nothing to no one.
Exactly. You just spread yourself too thin.
So clearly defining who that target audience is really the first step.
And it's a foundational step.
Because it impacts everything.
Your operations, your communications, everything flows from that.
Wow.
He also provides this really useful framework for understanding the different roles people play in the buying process.
Okay.
You've got the initiator, the influencer, the decider, the buyer, the user.
So many different roles.
Yeah. And the marketer's job is to identify those key influencers.
Right, but people who
can sway the decision and shape those choices. And while he acknowledges the importance of things like CRM systems and the data they provide, he's very clear that just collecting information is not enough.
Right.
You need to create a genuinely satisfying and even delightful customer experience.
Okay.
At every touch point.
And he ends by saying that in today's world, customers are making decisions based on value. So an organization's success really depends on its ability to contribute to the success of its customers.
It's a two-way street.
That's really interesting.
It is.
So that takes us to our third question. What does the customer value?
Right.
And this goes beyond just identifying who they are.
Yeah, it's deeper.
It's about understanding
what really matters to them.
Yeah, their needs, their wants, and their aspirations.
Their deepest desires.
Yeah, and Drucker has this really core principle here that's so insightful. He says, there are no irrational customers.
Love that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
He argues that individuals always act rationally based on their own context and realities and situations.
That's so true.
So organizations can't just guess at what customers value.
No, you have to find out.
They have to actively seek it out.
Directly from the source.
And he has this great example from his own practice.
I love how he does this.
Yeah, he would reach out to his former students years after they had graduated.
Wow.
And he would ask them,
that dedication.
What parts of their education were the most valuable?
Yeah, what really stuck with them?
What helped them in their careers? What helped them in their lives?
What could have been better?
And he wanted to know what could have been better.
Continuous improvement.
That's really amazing.
It is.
And both Drucker and Kotler, they make this point that a lot of times leaders in organizations, especially nonprofits, they answer this question about customer value.
Yeah.
Based on their own internal perspective.
They think they know.
Yeah. They're like, this is the value we're providing.
But they haven't really asked.
But have they asked the people they're serving?
Yes, exactly.
Kotler says that a lot of times organizations are operating under assumptions about customer value that are just wrong.
Yeah, they're not aligned with the customer's actual perception.
And we go back to the homeless shelter example that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Where they initially thought that the value they were providing was just food and shelter, like the basics.
Right, the essentials.
But when they actually talked to their clients, They realized that what the clients really needed was a safe haven.
A place where they felt supported.
A place where they could rebuild their lives.
And empowered.
And that changed how the shelter operated.
Fundamentally.
And what they expected of the people who came there.
And it also changed what was required
Right.
from the people seeking support.
Yeah, like the level of commitment they needed to have.
Exactly.
And Drucker reminds us that this understanding of value needs to extend beyond just the primary customer.
To the supporting customers as well.
Yeah, he uses the example of a school principal. Who needs to understand the values of the students, the parents, the teachers, the wider community?
So many stakeholders, all with different values.
So I think the big takeaway here is that you need to be constantly listening to all of your customers.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to accept what they say as truth.
As objective facts.
As facts.
Yeah.
And you need to bring that voice into all of your discussions and decision-making.
Absolutely.
So Jim Kouzes really emphasizes this point.
Okay.
He says that everything that great leaders do is about creating value.
For their customers.
For their customers. And he shares this great story about Patricia Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
Who was able to turn around Sinai Grace Hospital.
She was amazing.
And she did this by really focusing on the patient experience.
That was her priority.
She wanted to reduce wait times in the ER.
Yeah, nobody likes waiting in the ER.
She wanted to improve the physical environment.
Make it more welcoming.
And she really emphasized having empathetic and patient-centered interactions.
Those human touches are so important.
And they saw a huge improvement in customer service scores.
Wow.
And the community's confidence in the hospital went way up.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And Kouzes concludes that customers really value organizations that seek feedback, solve problems, meet needs, and have leaders who are willing to listen and challenge the status quo.
In service of the customer.
To make things better for the customer.
That's the key.
Okay. Now we're moving to the fourth question in Drucker's framework, which is, what are our results?
Okay.
And this is where organizations, especially in the social sector, really need to examine their impact and effectiveness.
Measure what matters.
Yeah, because they're trying to create change, right?
Exactly.
So Drucker's very clear on this. He says that the real measure of an organization's results is always found outside of its own walls.
In the real world?
Yeah, like in the actual changes it makes.
In people's lives.
In people's lives.
And in the conditions of the world.
And he gives this really powerful example of a mental health center that defined its results. Not just by attendance.
Right. Not just how many people showed up.
Yeah, but by things like the patient's willingness to try again, even when things get tough.
Resilience.
Their engagement with therapy, reduction in hospitalizations, whether they understand their illness better.
Understanding is so important.
And if they're able to set goals for themselves.
Empowering them to take control.
And he says that for organizations like this, the ultimate bottom line.
Yeah.
Isn't a financial number.
It's not about profit.
It's about whether or not people's lives are truly changed.
That's the real measure of success.
And he also talks about using both qualitative and quantitative measures.
Right. So you need both the stories.
And
the data. To get a full picture.
So like qualitative would be, those rich stories that show how much people's lives have changed.
Like, for example, the museum visitor whose life was saved by art.
Yeah, like that museum visitor whose life was saved by art.
That's a qualitative outcome.
Yeah, and quantitative would be, like hard data.
Objective numbers.
Yeah, like improved academic performance.
Like, for example.
In schools that have arts education.
Measurable results.
And then he brings up this really important but kind of challenging point.
Okay.
About organizations needing to decide what to strengthen and what to abandon.
Oh, yeah. That's a tough one.
He uses the parable of the talents.
I love that parable.
Yeah, where, the resources need to be invested in the areas that are giving the greatest return.
Or you're seeing the most impact.
Yeah.
You've got to put your money where your mouth is.
And he acknowledges that it's hard to abandon things.
It is.
Like sometimes it's, somebody's pet project.
Or they've been doing it for so long.
Or it's been going on for so long.
Yeah.
And he calls this investment in managerial ego.
Because it can be hard to admit that something's not working.
Yeah, like it hurts to say.
It does.
Okay, this isn't working.
Yeah, but it's necessary.
It is necessary.
For growth and progress.
Yeah. And he says that leadership is responsible for deciding what to appraise and protecting resources, making sure that they're being used effectively.
And making sure you're getting results.
To actually produce results.
That's the goal.
So Judith Rodin, who has a lot of experience in leading organizations, adds her perspective here.
Okay.
And she agrees with Drucker that measuring results is important, but she really focuses on how organizations use that information.
In their planning.
In their planning, yeah. So she says a strategic plan shouldn't be a static document.
Yeah, it shouldn't just sit on a shelf.
It needs to be designed to produce measurable results.
Right from the start.
And it needs to have ways to track those results.
And make adjustments along the way.
So it's more dynamic.
Yeah, more iterative.
Yeah, it's not just like, here's the plan and we're done.
No, it's a living document.
And she also warns about these two common pitfalls.
Okay.
One is being hesitant to try things where the impact is hard to measure.
Yeah, because you want to be able to prove that you're making a difference.
Right. And the other is focusing only on things that are easy to measure.
Yeah, because you might miss other important outcomes.
And she says it's a balancing act.
It is.
And in the end, she really reinforces Drucker's main message, which is that what matters most is whether an organization is actually improving lives.
That's the legacy.
So finally, we arrive at the fifth and final question. What is our plan?
The culmination of all the previous questions.
Yeah, so this is where you take everything we've learned.
Think about our mission, our customers, their values, our results.
And we turn it into a roadmap for the future.
The path forward.
And Drucker's very specific about what a plan should include.
He lays it all out.
The mission, the vision, the goals, the objectives, action steps, budget, and how we're going to measure our progress.
A comprehensive blueprint?
Yeah, and he says that the mission statement needs to reflect the opportunities, the competencies, and the commitment
of the organization.
Yeah, and even though the future is unpredictable,
you can't predict everything.
He says that planning helps to define where we want to go and how we're going to get there.
And it helps us to figure out how to get there,
even if there are detours along the way.
He really emphasizes having a small set of overarching goals, no more than 5.
Yeah, focus is key.
That are approved by the board, and those goals signal where the organization's going to focus its resources.
The big priorities.
Yeah. And he also talks about a vision statement.
Which is optional.
It's optional, but it's often really valuable.
Because it paints a picture of the future.
And he gives this great example of an art museum that had a vision, a mission, and 5 strategic goals.
Oh, I like that example.
And it really helped them to clarify their direction.
Yeah, it gave them a framework.
So he says that the board's role is to oversee the mission, the goals, the allocation of resources, and the measurement of progress.
Oversight and accountability.
And then management is responsible for the objectives, which are measurable and concrete.
The nuts and bolts.
And then he talks about these 5 key elements of a good plan.
The first one is abandonment, which is basically asking, if we weren't doing this already, would we start doing it now?
Tough question.
Yeah, it is.
Important.
The second is concentration, which is building on your successes.
And setting even higher standards.
Yeah. The third one is innovation.
Looking for new opportunity.
Finding the successes of tomorrow.
Exactly.
The fourth one is risk-taking, but it's not just reckless risk-taking.
Right. It's about balancing short-term and long-term risks.
And then the fifth one is analysis.
Studying the areas where you're not sure what to do.
Yeah, and he really emphasizes involving the people who are actually going to carry out the plan.
In the planning process.
In the planning process, yeah, so that they understand it and they own it.
That makes a big difference.
And then he reminds us that self-assessment and planning, it never really ends.
It's ongoing.
It's constant, yeah.
Always evolving.
And we should always be asking, what do we want to be remembered for?
That's a great question to keep in mind.
And then Kasturi Rangan, he adds to this by saying that planning is really about turning those big strategic goals into action.
Making them real.
Yeah.
Translating them into programs.
And he says it's an execution-oriented process.
With feedback loops.
Yeah, so you're constantly learning and adapting.
It's how you improve.
He says you need to have a strong focus on your goals, both the big mission and the more specific objectives.
Clarity of purpose.
Yeah, and he says be steadfast in your direction, but flexible in how you execute. And he quotes Drucker, who warned against masterminding the future.
Yeah, you can't control everything.
He says that individuals need to feel ownership and accountability.
For the programs they're responsible for.
Yeah, and when you monitor the execution of those programs,
yeah,
you actually learn more about your strategy.
It informs your future decisions.
And finally, Frances Hesselbein, with her perspective on transformational leadership.
She's amazing.
She outlines these 8 milestones.
For organizational transformation.
And 2 of those milestones are revisiting the mission and assessing performance using Drucker's 5 questions.
It all comes full circle.
It does.
Yes.
It's all connected.
So that's it. The 5 questions: what is our mission? Who is our customer? What is the customer value? What are our results? And what is our plan?
It's a powerful framework.
It really is.
For any organization.
And while the questions themselves might seem pretty simple,
yeah, they're deceptively so.
When you really dig into the answers,
it can be transformative.
So, we encourage you to think about these questions in your own work, in the organizations that you're a part of, or even in your personal and professional life.
Self-assessment is a continuous process.
It's not just a one-time thing.
Always evolving.
And so, as a final thought,
okay,
which of these 5 questions feels the most challenging?
Or the most urgent?
Or the most urgent for you right now?
Yeah, in your current situation.
And what's one small step that you can take?
To start exploring it.
To start exploring that question more deeply.
Food for thought. Food for thought.
Take that away with you.
Until next time.
See you then.
Bye now.